The stagecoach had left without her. Eliza Monroe stood alone in the dusty street of Dustwater, Kansas territory, her traveling case by her feet and the cold October wind cutting through her cloak like a knife. The sun was already sinking, a dull red circle over the prairie, and the air smelled of smoke and dry earth. She had missed her ride to the Double Bar Ranch by a single day. The station master didn't even bother to look up from his ledger when she asked about another coach. "The next one ain't for a month," he said, spitting into a brass spittoon. "Boss figured you weren't coming after that storm blew through Dodge." Eliza gripped the handle of her case tighter. "Is there another way to reach the Double Bar?" "Not unless you got a horse and a death wish," he muttered, "40 me through rough country. You wouldn't make it past Coyote Ridge alone." She didn't answer. She'd already come too far to be frightened by warnings. A month of scraping and saving, of working odd sewing jobs to afford the fare west. And now she stood in a town that didn't want her, with no ride, no friends, and no place to sleep. Dustwater was smaller than she'd imagined, just a single street of wooden buildings, their paint long since stripped by wind and sun. There was a saloon, a mercantile, a crooked church, and a boarding house that looked promising until the landlady saw her. "I don't rent to unaccompanied women," Mrs. Caldwell said, arms crossed tight. "Rules are rules." "I'm a seamstress," Eliza tried. "I have work waiting at the Double Bar Ranch." "Then best get there." The woman's eyes flicked over her tall, broad-shouldered, practical traveling dress instead off-frills. Her mouth tightened. "Try the saloon. Maybe Big Pete will let you in his storeroom." The saloon was worse. Big Pete laughed, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Storeroom's full, sweetheart. Besides, I ain't running a charity." By the time she reached the small cafe next to the mercantile, the sun had dropped low and the chill deepened. Inside, Thayer was thick with the smell of coffee and stew. A few townsfolk ate quietly, their eyes flicking toward her before turning away again. Eliza took a table near the stove, ordered a meal, and tried to steady herself. She'd faced worse. Poverty, loneliness, disappointment, but never with the wind this cold and the prairie this empty. When the meal ended, she lingered, reluctant to face the night. The proprietor's daughter, a shy slip of a girl, approached and wrung her hands. "Ma'am, P says we're closin'. He says you can't stay here all night." Of course, Eliza pulled out a few coins for the stew and coffee. They were nearly her last. "Where will you go?" the girl asked softly. Eliza didn't answer, because she didn't know. A low, growly voice came from the corner. "You're the seamstress meant for the Double Bar." She turned. The speaker was a man older, perhaps in his 40s, broad-shouldered beneath a worn coat. Silver-streaking dark hair that hadn't seen a barber in months. He had a quiet way about him, like a man used to silence. "I was," she said. "Seems I'm a day too late." Quote. He studied her for a long moment. Gray eyes unreadable. "Tom Harlan, don't wait for anyone, storm or no storm." Then he pushed back his chair and stood too cold to be wandering the streets. Eliza straightened, clutching her case. "I'll manage." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, touched his mouth. "I expect you would, but there's no need." He walked toward the door, then paused. "You come in," quote. She should have been afraid. A lone man, a stranger in a strange town. But there was something in his tone that wasn't a demand, only an offer, and the thought of another hour in the cold pushed her to trust him. She followed him through the dark streets to a small cabin on the edge of town. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the light spilling from the window was warm and steady. Inside it was neat, sparse, but clean. A man's place. Simple furniture, tools arranged in careful order. A fire burned in the hearth, casting orange light across the walls. He added a log to the fire, then turned to her. "You can put your case down." Eliza hesitated near the door. "I don't want to be a burden, you won't be." He nodded toward a long bench against the wall covered with buffalo hide and folded blankets. "You can sleep there." She glanced at him, uncertain. "Here in this room." He crossed to the bench, pulled back the top blanket, revealing clean bedding beneath. His voice was steady. "Matter of fact, right here. It's warm and safe." She realized what he meant. Nothing improper, just simple kindness, the kind that expected nothing in return. He extended a rough, calloused hand. "Isaiah Dune, I keep to myself mostly, but I won't see anyone freeze in Dustwater. Eliza Monroe." She replied, taking his hand. It was warm despite the cold, "Thank you. There's water in the picture if you need to wash. Privy's out back, I'll be in the other room." He hung his coat by the door and paused before leaving. "Don't mind the town. They're set in their ways. Doesn't mean their ways are right." Then he was gone, leaving her alone by the fire. Eliza sank onto the bench, her hands still trembling from the cold and from relief. For the first time in days, she was warm. For the first time in months, she was safe. She unlaced her boots, folded her cloak neatly, and lay beneath the blanket. The smell of pine smoke filled the room. Through the wall, she could hear the faint sounds of Isaiah moving in the next room. Quiet, steady, like a man who'd lived alone too long. Outside, the prairie wind howled against the cabin walls. Inside, Eliza Monroe closed her eyes and for the first time since leaving Kansas, did not feel entirely alone. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she lay still, unsure where she was. Then memory returned, the missed stagecoach, the cold streets of Dustwater, and Isaiah Dune's quiet voice offering her warmth and safety. Morning light streamed through the small cabin window, catching on the dust motes that floated in the air. Isaiah stood by the stove, moving with the calm precision of someone long accustomed to solitude. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong, scarred forearms. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's ready if you want some." Quote, "Thank you." Her voice was still husky with sleep. She slipped from beneath the blanket, folded it neatly, and poured herself a tin cup from the pot on the side table. The coffee was bitter and strong, frontier strength, but she welcomed its heat. They ate in companionable silence. Bacon, biscuits, and a jar of peach preserves that tasted faintly of summer. When they finished, Eliza gathered the dishes automatically. "I'll wash these. It's the least I can do." Isaiah nodded. "Reckon that's fair." While she cleaned, her eyes took in the cabin in daylight. It was simple but orderly. Everything had a purpose. There were gaps on the walls where pictures had once hung, and a second chair that looked like it hadn't been used in years. This had once been a home for more than one person, she realized, and not anymore. When the dishes were done, Isaiah spoke again about the double bar. "It's 40 May West. I could take you part way, but I ain't got a wagon. Just an old mule that barely tolerates me." "I appreciate that," she said, drawing the last plate. "But I won't trouble you further. I'll find a way." He frowned slightly. "Nobody else will help you. Not a woman alone. Not in this town." "I'll manage." "You got a habit of saying that." His eyes met hers across the room, steady and unreadable. "Most folks who say it don't mean it, but you, I believe you do." She didn't know how to answer, so she simply nodded. Later that morning, she walked into town to ask about sewing work. The cold air bit at her cheeks and people stared as she passed. Some looked curious, others disapproving. The tall woman who'd spent the night in Isaiah Dune's cabin, Dustwater, didn't need proof before it passed judgment. At the small church near the end of the street, she found Reverend Murphy's wife sitting on the porch mending shirts with trembling hands. The woman's face was pale, her health clearly poor. "I heard you might need help with sewing," Eliza said. The Reverend's wife smiled with weary gratitude. "Oh, what a blessing, my dear. My hands aren't what they used to be. When can you start?" "Right now," Eliza said, setting her case down. By sundown, she'd earned her first wages in Dustwater, small, but enough for thread and a loaf of bread. Mrs. Murphy was kind, even chatty. Yet when Eliza mentioned that she was staying at Isaiah Dune's cabin, the older woman's smile faltered. "Isaiah," she whispered, glancing toward the church as if afraid to be overheard. "Be careful, my dear. He's not a bad man, but he's had tragedy. His wife died in childbirth, then his daughter. A few years later, scarlet fever, and there was an accident 3 years ago. He was driving freight through Devil's Canyon when the wagon went over the edge. A family died. He blamed himself, sold everything, and moved out to that cabin. Folks say he ain't been the same since." Eliza's chest tightened. "That's a heavy burden for any one man." Mrs. Murphy nodded. "A kind heart, but a broken one. The town never forgave him, though he did nothing wrong." That evening, Eliza returned to the cabin with a small bundle of mending and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. Isaiah was outside splitting wood. The rhythmic swing of his axe filled the crisp air, each strike clean and powerful. "How was your day?" he asked, setting down the axe. "Productive. The Reverend's wife hired me. Good womankind. She told me about the accident." He was silent for a long moment. The wind carried the smell of smoke and pine between them. "Did she know?" "I'm sorry for your losses," Eliza said quietly. Isaiah's jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low. "We all have our ghosts, Miss Monroe. Question is whether we let them drive us or we drive them." She wanted to ask more, but his tone made it clear. The conversation was over. They went inside and shared supper in silence. Yet there was something different now. Not distance, but understanding. Days passed into weeks. Eliza's work grew. The townsfolk grudgingly admitted her stitches were fine and Hermaner's honest. Still, gossip lingered. Each time she entered a shop, whispers followed. And each night Isaiah pretended not to notice her weary sigh as she hung her cloak by the door. One night, as she mended one of his shirts by the fire, she spoke without looking up. Back in Kansas, I had my own shop. Did well for myself till the landlord proposed. When I refused, he tripled my rent. Told everyone I was ungrateful, unwomanly. Isaiah leaned back in his chair, pipe unlit in his hand. And you left. Quote, I left, she said simply. I thought the West might be kinder. He gave a humorless laugh. The West don't care much for kindness, but it respects those who endure. She met his gaze across the firelight. You've done both. The look he gave her then was quiet and long, filled with something she couldn't name. By late November, snow dusted the plains. Eliza still slept on the bench by the fire, though Isaiah had insisted more than once that she take his room. She always refused. Yet she noticed how he added an extra blanket each night, how he brewed coffee before dawn so the cabin smelled warm when she woke, when gossip in town worsened, when women crossed the street to avoid her. Isaiah's temper finally broke. They've no right, he growled. You've done nothing wrong. Let them talk, she said, voice calm. Words can't freeze me and they can't take away what's decent. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. You're stronger than you look, so are you. The days grew shorter, the cold sharper. Yet inside the cabin, a quiet rhythm had formed. Coffee and biscuits in the morning, work and chores by day, soft conversation by firelight at night. And somewhere between the steady crackle of the flames and the silence of the prairie beyond, two lonely souls began to heal. One evening, Isaiah spoke suddenly. Reckon I should have told you sooner about the accident. Eliza looked up from her sewing. You don't owe Meth that. Maybe not, but I owe it to myself. Horses spooked near Devil's Canyon. Wagon went over. I tried to save them. Couldn't. The little girl, she was about the same age my daughter was when she died. Thought God was punishing me. Her eyes softened. You can't punish yourself forever for what wasn't your fault. He stared into the fire. You sound like someone who's tried. Quote, maybe I have. For a long while they said nothing. Just watched the fire burn down. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, steady, endless. Inside, warmth lingered and something unspoken passed between them. Not words, not promises. Just quiet understanding. And for the first time in years, Isaiah Doone didn't feel like a ghost haunting his own life. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. By December, Dustwater had surrendered to winter. Snow blanketed the rooftops and turned the dirt road into a hard crust of ice. The air carried the bite of cold metal, and each breath rose white against the gray sky. Eliza Monroe had now been living in Isaiah Doone's cabin for over a month. The rhythm of their days had become as natural as breathing. She rose early to make coffee while he tended the fire, and they ate breakfast in the same comfortable silence that needed no words. In the evenings they read, or worked side by side, she mending, he carving small pieces of wood he never seemed to finish. But life in Dustwater had a way of reminding folks that peace was temporary. The whispers had grown sharper. A woman at the mercantile turned her back when Eliza greeted her. Mrs. Caldwell, the boarding house keeper, made a point of saying loudly that respectable women didn't live with men they weren't wed to. When Eliza came home that day, Isaiah noticed the tension in her shoulders before she spoke. They're saying worse now. She admitted that I planned this, that I pretended to miss the coach to trap you. Isaiah's jaw tightened. They've got no right. They've got words, and sometimes that's worse. She folded her cloak and met his eyes. But I'm not leaving. I've had enough of running from other people's opinions. He looked at her for a long moment before saying softly, then neither am I. That Sunday they went to church together. It was Eliza's idea. She wanted the town to see them as they were, unashamed and unhidden. When they entered the small wooden chapel, the whispers began immediately. But Isaiah offered her his arm and walked her to the back pew like it was the most natural thing in the world. Reverend Murphy hesitated only a moment before beginning the service. His sermon that morning was on kindness, how it mattered more than appearances. Eliza caught the faintest glint of humor in his eyes as said it. Afterward, Mrs. Caldwell confronted them on the church steps. Miss Monroe, she said, her voice cold as the snow, For the sake of decency, you should find other accommodations. Eliza met her gaze calmly. For the sake of kindness, you should offer them. Before the woman could reply, Isaiah spoke, his tone quiet but iron steady. Mrs. Caldwell, you turned her away when she came looking for a roof. I didn't. Maybe think on that before you start preaching about decency. The older woman's mouth snapped shut. The crowd murmured. And though the whispers would continue, something in dust began to shift that day. A week later, a letter arrived unexpected from Kansas. Eliza's brother Thomas writing to apologize for not believing her when she'd said she was leaving, because of Clayton Harper's cruelty. Harper, her former landlord, the man whose pride she'd wounded, he was expanding westward, Thomas warned, and if he hears your name again, he'll cause trouble. Eliza folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer, saying nothing, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it brought. The first snowstorm of December came fierce and sudden. Wind howled through the prairie like a living thing, rattling shutters and bending trees. Isaiah and Eliza spent those days snowed in, surviving on coffee, cornbread, and the comfort of each other's company. They talked more now about the past, about the future, about what it meant to begin again after losing everything. One night as the fire crackled low, Isaiah said quietly, "When you're ready to leave for the double bar come spring, I'll take you myself." Eliza looked up from her sewing. "And what if I'm not ready to leave?" He studied her face across the flickering light. "Then I reckon I'd be the last to complain." Silence followed, warm and steady. Days later, the storm cleared and the sky turned bright again. Eliza ventured into town to deliver mending to Mrs. Murphy. That's when she saw him, Clayton Harper, standing outside the Mercantile, smiling, that polished smile she remembered too well. "Eliza Monroe," he said, tipping his hat. "Imagine finding you here, still unwed, I see." She froze, heart pounding. "You have no business here." "Oh, but I do. The railroad's coming through this area. I've invested heavily. Dustwater's going to be a new hub of progress." His smile sharpened. "I hear you've made yourself comfortable with Mr. Doone." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not interested in gossip. I'm not gossiping," he said smoothly. "Just observing. A woman like you, alone past 30, no prospects. You make do where you can, but you always land on your feet. You always find a man to rescue you." She turned and walked away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. But by evening, half the town knew he'd arrived. When she told Isaiah, his expression darkened. "He's the one you ran from." "Yes," he exhaled through his nose, voice low. "Then I'll see that he leaves. No, Isaiah. If you confront him, it'll only make things worse. Let me handle him." But Harper wasn't the kind of man to leave quietly. He began spreading lies in saloons and shops, twisting the story of Eliza's past, calling her barren, unfit, manipulative, the same poison he'd used back in Kansas. One evening, Isaiah came home furious. He told the banker, "You trapped me here." Said, "You're using me to get my land." Eliza's throat tightened. "Let them talk." "I'm done letting them talk," he said, stepping close. "I won't let him hurt you again. He can't hurt me." "Yes, he can." "Because he stopped himself. "Because I care what happens to you." The words hung in the air. The silence that followed said everything they hadn't dared to. The next morning, Isaiah rode into town. When he came back, his knuckles were split and his expression was grim. "Eliza," he said quietly, "Harper's gone." Quote. She went to him, touching his hand gently. "You fought him?" He nodded once. "He deserved worse, but he won't be back." She didn't scold him. She simply held his hand until his shoulder seized. Weeks passed. The winter deepened, and yet the small cabin felt warmer than ever. The townsfolk's gossip faded. Work returned. Life began to amend itself, one quiet day at a time. Then came the fever. Isaiah had been splitting wood when it struck, sudden and merciless. By nightfall, he was burning with heat, his breathing ragged. Eliza nursed him through the storm that followed, cooling his skin with snow-damp cloths, whispering his name when he called out for ghosts long gone. "Sarah," he mumbled once. "Is Rose better?" "It's Eliza," she said softly, holding his hand. "You're safe. You're home." For 3 nights and 2 endless days, she fought for him, feeding him broth, changing sweat-soaked sheets, praying aloud when the silence felt too heavy to bear. And then on the 4th morning, his fever broke, his eyes opened clear and gray as winter sky. "Eliza," he rasped. "You stayed." Quote. She smiled through tears. "Where else would I be?" He reached weakly for her hand. Right here, he whispered. By spring, Isaiah was well again. The snow melted and wildflowers painted the prairie. The cabin grew brighter with each sunrise, laughter finding its way into their days. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink low, Isaiah said quietly, "You ever think about that night you came here when you asked where you'd sleep?" She smiled. Eyes soft. "I do. I told you right here," he said. "Didn't realize then I meant forever." Eliza rested her head on his shoulder. "Then I suppose it's a good thing I never caught that stagecoach." And as the prairie wind whispered through the tall grass and thesky burned gold, they both knew that sometimes the best journeys began with being left behind, and that home wasn't a place. It was a person who'd look at you and say, "Right,